And welcome back to the Walter Bosley channel. And as you can see, my guest is our friend Hans Dietrich. Welcome, Hans Dietrich.
Thanks again, Walter, for having me on. Looking forward to
Yeah.
this. We always tend to have great conversations.
So you recently made an appearance at a conference.
I did. I was at Alien Event and Biomed Expo in LA. What was it, 3 weekends ago?
No,
Decent turnout. Yeah.
last weekend, right?
That was a week. It's been 2 weeks. Yeah.
Has it?
Yeah.
Oh, wow, that's weird. Are you going to be appearing in are you going to be speaking at the one in Las Vegas in October?
I think so. I'm not quite sure my
So will
schedule.
I.
So great. Yay.
Yes, he contacted me, asked me, I said yes. So that one I'll definitely.
I guess he's also trying to put together a show, an alien event, um, symposium in Sedona in July.
Oh,
So that would be
okay,
interesting to go to again.
that's interesting.
I
We'll
liked
see.
Sedona when
He
I was
might have
there.
that. But anyway, talking about aliens and stuff, there's been some interesting things in the news
Yes, there
recently.
has.
Congressman Tim Burchett, that interview's been going around where he said if Americans, average folks, saw or knew what he was briefed on, they'd be awake at night. They'd lie awake at night, scared, is the
Hmm.
implication. Now, some people are saying threat narrative, you know, um, but my position. I think yes, while the military industrial complex of the United States will use threat narrative to drum up, the voters wanting to give them more money and
Exactly.
to
Yep.
do their nefarious things. That does not necessarily mean that there's not a threat out there. It just means that the military industrial complex runs with that, will exaggerate with that, and use that. So that's
Wouldn't be
that's
the
where I'm
first
at with it.
time.
Yeah. So what do you think about what do you think he was talking about, or what do you think's
I'm
going
I'm
on
a
with that?
mixed bag on this, having been an experiencer myself. I'm curious if a lot of what we're seeing is military tech
Right.
and quite possibly ancient military tech.
Ah, that's the part that intrigues the hell out of me. As I think 90%, that's my percentage I throw out there. 90% of legitimately unidentified flying object cases and reports, I think, are some type of classified or little known human technology from modern present time, um, of the existing nations and organizations that do that. But yeah, the idea of ancient tech. Now, I'm guessing that what that implies from your perspective is that the people operating this ancient tech are of ancient civilizations or such.
There's kind of a 50-50 split there. So
Okay.
interestingly, when we were in Afghanistan, if we keep bringing this topic back up, there were reports that one of the elite special forces, SEAL team, whatever, had discovered in a cave an ancient Vimana.
Yeah.
And then that story was swept so quickly under the rug. So something we could be reverse engineering and trying to fly ourselves. That's a
Yeah.
good possibility.
Sure.
Possibly a lost civilization that lives amongst us, but doesn't communicate with us that they're an old civilization.
That's what I tend to lean toward as part of the answer. I think when people list, well, is it this, is it that, or is it this third thing? The answer is yes, because I think it's a mix of all of it. I've long thought we've talked about that, you and I. Also, I've talked about it a lot on this channel that there are others sharing this world with us.
Well, and this also isn't exactly a new discovery as well. I mean, you look at what the Ahnenerbe and the Germans were doing before World War II. They were going around the world trying to find ancient technology
Yeah. And
and ancient civilizations, or at least that was the premise. So,
finding it, I think, to some degree. Um,
sure.
I would think that the legend, the story I was told in the mid 90s about Antarctica and the discoveries down there, and I was told that that happened around 1959 or 60.
Hmm.
Even though currently the popular tale is that it wasn't until after 2000, which okay, I think there certainly have been additional discoveries, but I was told the same line in the 90s about 30 years, prior, almost 40 years prior. So in my mind, it wouldn't surprise me if what Nazi Germany had been looking for is what led to this discovery in 1959 or 60, right? Like,
Well, they
no.
they were told something by the Tibetan monks when they went into Tibet
Hmm.
about Agartha.
Yeah,
And they figured that the entrances to Agartha, the inner Earth, were in Antarctica. And so they started, I mean, what was it, 111 U-boats or more taken down there.
yeah,
They weatherized aircraft. I'm kind of wondering what happened to the Bell technology because if they could get it to work, that would be an incredible power source to run operations down there. And
sure.
again, they had probably some of the most detailed submarine maps of how to go underneath the continent through caving systems. And
You
to
know,
me, it's interesting because how do you see out of a submarine? How do you know where the walls are? How do you know the precise angle that you need to go down and up to not hit things?
I'll tell you, I got
Okay.
the answer, possibly. Um, who broadcast, what was it, the 1936 or 1932 Olympics?
The Germans.
The Germans. Television. How do we know that these particular U-boats didn't have some type of television capability
Hmm,
um, embedded in that special snorkel that is talked about? Joseph Farrell talks about, they had this advanced thing. We don't know if that wasn't the case. There could have been the lens, up in the conning tower or in the snorkel, the periscope, and the monitor, down on the bridge where
sure.
next to the radar guy. And they could have used television to guide themselves, to guide the
That
U-boat.
that makes perfect sense.
And you bring up another thing, the Bell would have been a fantastic source of power
Yes.
for a base, remote base in Antarctica. Again, referring to our friend Joseph Farrell, his bone to pick with the idea of a secret UFO type base, special base, down in Antarctica, Nazi base during that time. His bone to pick is that how do you power it? You would have to have an enormous amount of energy and power. Okay, well, here's the thing. If you've adapted the Bell technology to being your energy source, yes, according to what we've speculated, and what little we know, that Nazi Bell required a pretty good amount of electricity,
Gobs of
electrical power,
electricity.
right? Well,
Yes.
here's the thing. Just like we don't know if there was television technology installed in certain U-boats, we don't know exactly what was in the hold of certain um, uh, uh, maritime German ships that went down to Antarctica. It could have been down in the hold was just a complete big electrical power station,
System.
so to
Yes.
speak, that could have been providing the Bell with, its energy. And I don't recall anyone ever asking these questions. These just
I
as
I
you were talking, it
I've
popped into
never
my head.
I've never thought of it like that either, but it seems that the tests that they were running on the Bell, they were pulsing it with gobs of electricity.
Yeah.
Maybe they figured out I don't quite know the scientific terms, how to have it sustain its own energy field where they wouldn't
Yes.
need that much electrical input. It would just be enough to kick it into motion, kind of like what you talk about with the airship mystery,
Yeah.
some sort of device that gets things spinning and up to speed, and then
Flywheels.
its own energy takes over that inertia. Yep.
Yeah, exactly. And you're talking torsion, you're talking rotation. Who's to say that there wasn't an element in their development of the bell in which, just as you say, they stored kind of a torsion battery? I've never heard anyone talk about that. And
I
so,
mean, we do that with electric cars with regenerative power.
yeah.
So why couldn't that technology be much older and, something that was being experimented with?
Yeah, based on this, I have to rethink the dismissal of a special base down there because my gosh, what the first step would be to go through and study all the shipping
Right.
manifests that the Germans and see how many ships were down there. If you had enough ships that were these electrical power stations, floating power stations, you might be able to provide enough, initial energy to get that going. And then of course there's storage. Now, in
Hmm.
oh gosh, which book of mine? I'm trying to remember. Did
I'm
we
here.
lose you? Oh,
No,
you're
I'm
there.
still here. Yep.
Oh,
Sorry.
okay. And I'm trying to remember which book of mine it is in which I talk about there is a particular island. Secret Missions 5, Veiled Destinies. I talk about this island just off of Antarctica that the Germans were favoring. And I wonder if that's where their power station was. I wonder if that's
Well,
where
didn't they also take over the Falklands during the Falkland Island Wars
I think so.
off
I
off
think
of
they might have.
Argentina because the British were there and the Germans were in Argentina.
Yeah. I
And there
know
was a
there's
big.
been a movie made of that.
Oh, really? Oh,
Yeah,
interesting.
yeah, where that was hinted at. Oh, thank you. So, yeah, wow.
Hmm.
That's what I love about these discussions is I've
We
never
we start
really,
thinking.
yeah, I never really thought of TV technology, and they've had, and they demonstrated it to the world 10 years before World War II. So, duh, why wouldn't they? Maybe that's one of the secrets we discovered on the captured U-boats is some
Hmm.
type of television setup, and we kind of kept that to ourselves or from the public. I don't know.
Right. Hmm.
So,
Plus, you have a ton of geothermal activity down there. That could have also been helping
sure,
to power.
sure. Yeah. So going back to, the ancient technology, they were down there, they were digging around. Um, we know that there's Admiral Byrd's story. Now,
Right.
there's a part of his story that I think we can discount. But that report of the operation,
High
um,
jump.
the high jump ending way before it should have, that's a fact. Um, his quote in the South American
Argentine.
newspaper, yeah, the
Yeah.
Argentinian newspaper, that's real. That's a fact. That happened. He did talk about this technology. So,
That could
um,
fly from pole to pole. And yeah,
yeah. So whether that
interesting.
was German Wunderwaffe or whether that was some type of ancient technology discovered and activated by the Germans, or whether it was some hybrid technology that the Germans did with the ancient, or whether it was this old technology being flown by its actual owners, at this point, we don't know. I think somebody does. Um, and we have to, when we're talking about this old technology, ancient and such, we have to look at stories like Atlantis and especially the Vedic.
Sure.
Um, because they've been there in our faces, for how many ages. And just because in the West we are Judeo-Christian centric, you know, if it's not Judeo-Christian, um, it gets ignored. It must be ignored. And I think that's one of the reasons. I mean, because when you look at um, Christianity,
Sure.
Christendom, purely political and as a material body, it makes sense that part of their mission, look at the Templars. They weren't there. I mean, sure, they would protect pilgrims on the road and
No,
stuff like that.
they were looking for ancient mysteries. Yes.
Exactly. Exactly. And they found some. But I think that mission was extended to where, it's find the old stuff, take possession of it, and then from there, I think the agenda was to, deny what
Well,
they
look,
knew about its origin.
just in the public sector, look at how advanced technology and the technology creep has gone and even in the
Yeah.
last 20 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, I went to Intel Developer Forum in 1998. I was there as a vendor, basically, doing sublimation, kind of like what I'm wearing here, but we were doing it on computer encasements. And the two biggest parts of that show were one, Silicon Graphics, which was one of the first amazing 3D rendering computers. They cost anywhere from $50,000 and up.
Yeah.
And then the Cray supercomputer, which, as you know, was about the size of a Volkswagen bus. And and they cost 40 to 50 million dollars to make one Cray supercomputer.
Wow.
I have
Wow.
three of them sitting right here in this device. That's how much processing power has changed since 1998.
Yeah. Yeah. And we all know the story that, the Apollo program used technology more primitive than
Oh, yeah.
what's in our phones. And
Look at Voyager. Okay, so the Voyager
well,
probe that's out there, who God knows where, we're still being told that we're receiving radio telemetry from it, but I highly doubt that. Just because the battery used to power it, although it's a nuclear power cell, its output is literally enough to power the light bulb in your refrigerator.
so do you think we are receiving signals or not?
I
Or
don't
do
know.
you
I don't
think
know
we're
because
they're
radio is
using something
interesting.
else?
Radio signals can travel the speed of light
Okay.
through space. And so there is a possibility that we are, but as I like to put it, and I'm not, maybe get a little controversial here, it's like trying to smell a fart in a tornado. How do we even know? That it's so far away. There's no way that we can bounce things off of it. It's just it's a big mystery to me. And like you were saying, we went, to the moon and back, what, 5 times on like a Sony calculator watch. I mean,
Yeah.
but there is still that very interesting quote. I can't remember who exactly said it, but when they were talking about the German rocket programs and putting rockets into space, I can't remember the scientist. It
Willie
wasn't
Lay?
Dorn, it wasn't Dornberger. I
Was
can't
it
remember.
Lay? Was it Willie Lay?
It might have been. He said we got help from the others.
Well, I got another Willie Lay quote for you. I'm glad you
So
brought him
that
up.
really blew my mind. And it's like, well, what does he mean by that?
Well, actually, was it Lay or was it Oberth?
I think it was Oberth. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. I got another Oberth quote. I've never heard this one, so I want to share this with you.
Okay, I'm down.
Um, Professor oh, this is from a book on Vedic stuff,
Hmm.
Earthman and Devolution by R. Pilati.
Okay.
And on page 328 in the chapter UFO Origins, Who They Are, What They Are, and Where They Come From, he says, Professor Hermann Oberth, a former Nazi scientist working for the USA at the time, stated, quote, we know of a material that will, in practice, insulate from the pull of gravity any object covered by it, end quote. The date is not given for this quote, but other than it was before 1955,
Hmm.
according to this
Is
author.
this memory metal that we hear so much about?
Well, it might be. I mean, I thought of that, and then I thought of the Sonora Aero Club, and
Well, if
and
you look at even the moon lander, I mean, that thing's wrapped in gold tinfoil and cardboard.
yeah.
So you
Um,
you, you kind of have to wonder, in the extremities of being on the surface of the moon, in the shadows, it's negative 500 degrees, but in the sun,
mhm.
because there's no atmosphere, it's over 500 degrees.
We have another thing here that's interesting. It'll lead us into um, Congressman Burchett's comment about. I think he also mentioned the fact that we know more about the surface of the moon than we know what's under our oceans, in our
Right.
oceans. And the same author, Pilati, in the same book, next page, um, there's this unnamed doctor or a German doctor, Rhinelander, which,
Hmm.
you know, okay, was contacted in Germany by non-Terrans from an underwater habitation and was given plans for building a so-called marvelous aerial craft. He was told to move to some location in the United States near some played out coal mines.
Hmm.
And
Okay.
apparently, a byproduct of coal was needed for the craft. The non-Terrans, with seemingly unlimited funds, assisted, and apparently 4 or 5 ships were built with Earth escaping capabilities. So it's that's interesting. A coal mine. So there's the underground thing. A byproduct of coal, could that possibly be diamonds? I mean, why not go to a diamond mine, I guess, right? But
Also, you have coke, which is a byproduct of coal,
okay.
and I believe fluoride is as well.
Hmm. Now, what would these two things do for flying craft or anti-gravity, I
No
wonder?
idea. Yeah.
Huh. Very, very
You
interesting.
have to
This is
look
why
look
I like,
look into the chemistry behind them and see if there's
yeah,
any sort of fuel or application.
this is why I like looking to these Vedic scholars because, in all the years in the West here, particularly in American ufology, we get the same old stories over and over, the same old quotes over and over. But when
Yep.
you look to these other scholars in other parts of the world, you get these little tidbits like that Oberth quote. I'd never heard that. Maybe others listening have,
Hmm.
but I had never heard the Oberth quote about the material that resists gravity. And this business of, he's told to go to an area where there's abandoned or worked out coal mines. I'd not heard that before either. So it can give more insight, I think, into
Hmm.
these technologies.
What would they use the coal for? That is a
Yeah.
fascinating one. Because it
And
is
when
it's carbon. So,
and when
hmm,
you think of the fairy lore, they're very famously associated with the underworld, and we have
right.
underworld mythologies. Well, folks, it's time again to apply the idea that within mythology, there's a nugget of truth there. And my gosh, this global discussion of an underworld, civilizations under the surface of the planet, I think it's time that we stop just assuming that that was all mythology and fairy tales. To me, there's got to be some, nugget of truth. Um,
Especially when you have unconnected cultures talking about the same thing.
mhm. Exactly.
And it's interesting,
Exactly.
we're talking, Vedic technology, Vimanas, these flying palaces that
Hmm.
you read about in the Mahabharata. Unfortunately, we can't really take the Vimanika Shastra with
Right.
too much seriousness because we know that
Right.
that came out of like 1940s or something.
No, not 1908
It was
in
1908. Okay.
yeah, in Sanskrit,
Right.
okay? And it wasn't translated into a Western language until the World War II
Yeah,
era.
that's right.
So
And apparently it came from a channel.
yeah, yeah, that's another
But what
problem.
they're talking about in that is incredibly fascinating. Going back to the bell, what they were talking about was using a red mercury
Hmm.
that they would make into an electrical plasma to power these Vimanas. And I've often found that interesting because who would have been thinking along those lines without some sort of practical application?
Yeah.
And then along comes the bell, and you're doing the same thing. You're whipping up this red mercury compound and forcing gobs of electricity through it to make it into a stabilized, or I guess unstabilized, plasma energy field, and screwing around with that. And so that's always been a huge fascination. And then even in Buddhist like philosophy and lore, you have descriptions of Vimanas as well.
Hmm. Hmm.
And the
Yes.
way they describe the engines, I mean, they describe them as flying palaces, towers of seven, levels, basically. So here's this flying Vimana. It's a flying palace. But because they didn't have the words to describe what these things sounded like buzzing around, they said that they were accompanied by hundreds of thousands of musical instruments being played without players. So that's a cacophony of noise, unlike, you
I
know,
know, so do I. So funny.
unlike a huge.
That and then wedding crap.
Sorry, let me close the door. Go on.
I was going to say, unlike anything we've really discovered, but it's this cacophony of noise that's interesting because they would have no other way of describing the sound of the engines or the roar of the technology except through the use of musical harmonics. And so these crafts could have been powered by some sort of frequency that gave off sound.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
And they had no other way of describing it except hundreds of thousands of musical instruments. To me, it sounds like a giant orchestra, warming up before they all hit E or whatever note it is that they chime off
Sure.
on. And it's just like this huge cacophony of sound. But amplify that to hundreds of thousands of musical instruments being played without players because they couldn't see where the noise was coming from,
Right.
but they had to describe it somehow so the reader of the text could understand what they were talking about.
Sure. Sure. Um, a some type of sonic propulsion, sonic
I'd
based.
imagine, or something that works on a vibrational or
Ah, yeah, vibration, because I
a
recall
frequency technology.
the first time I heard about Wilson, the mysterious Wilson, was from my father, because my mentor told me that he worked for Wilson the Younger back in
Oh,
the
interesting.
50s,
Okay,
that
I,
Wilson
I I
was, and
remember
I've
you
talked
talking
about
about
this and
this.
written about it, but this is the first time I ever heard about Wilson. This is before I learned about the Sonora Club and all
Oh,
that.
interesting.
And my dad said that what was demonstrated to the Air Force personnel, my dad included, um, uh, was this anti-gravity platform. And the
Hmm.
way they would activate the anti-gravity, he said the old man, he said there were two Wilsons. There was the older one who was they called the professor, and he had this little hammer kind of thing.
A tuning
And
fork of sorts.
yeah, and there was this metal flange sticking out of one corner. And he says that they would tap that and it would activate the anti-gravity buoyancy. And then they had a slide bar control that would make it rise up so high that they couldn't see it and then bring it down. That's what he said that he saw out in the desert, out either beyond Victorville and Barstow or whatever. He gave me the name of the location. I've been still looking for it. Um, and if I find anything like it, of course, I'm going to talk about it here. But so there's vibration. And then when I learned about the Sonora Aero Club and learned more about the 1893 airship mystery, you have the witnesses talking about the Wilson of that time tapping things and getting kind of a vibration going. Um, and just for the record, as I stated in the books, and I did thorough research, I never found where my dad had even heard of the Sonora Aero Club either, or the Wilsons of the airship mystery. And, I did have my mentor saying, no, that was a family, a generational thing where they were involved in this technology. So yeah, there's the vibration part, the resonance, and of course, sonic elements would enhance that.
They're messing around, on the laboratory bench with levitating
Mhm.
small metallic balls or objects inside of,
Keely.
yeah, inside of a wave,
Hmm.
a sound wave, basically. And so they can create a pocket in the middle of a sound wave, and that's where you get this levitation.
Yeah, interesting stuff. Very, very interesting stuff. And the more you look into it, and the more you study what is talked about and written about of the ancient knowledge, it makes sense that it's that kind of technology. In our times, people get so wrapped up in the combustion engine and rocket, you know,
Right.
um, propulsion. That's the only thing, that's the end all be all, that's the most advanced. Well, that's an assumption.
It is,
It's
and it's especially when you look at ancient sites like the giant obelisks at the Aswan Quarry, or even outside of Baalbek, you have the quarry there, and they're moving 12,000 tons around like it's nothing, and we can't do that with our nuts and bolts diesel powered technology today.
right, right. So, what the hell? What were they
Yeah,
doing? I just think it's long overdue time that more people in the West started giving the Eastern sources a little bit more respect and attention
sure.
because the Western, the way it's presented is just straight linear. We are the end all be all, the greatest things that have ever lived upon this earth, and that's a foolish path to go down.
And maybe there's information that we've overlooked that could be applicable somewhere. And
Mhm.
it takes a team of good scientific minds to wrap their head around what is being discussed in some of these ancient texts, and then trying to reverse engineer something from those descriptions
And I think that's being done.
without using modern, the
Yeah,
advent of modern technology in a sense.
yeah, and I think that's what they've been doing secretly. Um, they,
The them.
the them, and that's going to lead into when we get into the second half here, because we've got
5 minutes.
about 5 minutes in this half. I want to talk about the others and some of the implications of some recent events and you know the moon and things like that. But yeah, this technology bugaboo. This is something you have people in ufology in the community, fans of it, and even a lot of scholars who are locked in to the ET hypothesis. To them, a lot of them don't want to hear anything um, that's prior to World War II. They just don't want to hear it. The Nazis captured crashed ET saucers and reversed engineered them, and Roswell was the start of it all. And they are stubborn as hell about this. There can be no other answer. It's extremely dogmatic.
Hmm.
It's religious, of course, and
It,
that's the discussion.
it is interesting that more and more has come out since the advent of nuclear
Yeah,
bombs.
yeah,
It's like this is where the storyline all of a sudden kicks off.
yeah,
Where and why. Uh,
yeah.
it, it we were talking about going to the moon. I mean, we're sending the Artemis mission there right now. It's on day
Yeah.
2, 5 days,
Oh yeah.
and it's fascinating that they've had to create all new technology just to make it happen versus obviously we lost a lot of the original technology, but I think that's interesting because you look at the end of the Apollo program and they had fully funded 18, 19, and 20.
Yeah.
Fully funded. All the
Mhm.
astronauts were trained. They picked the sites that they were going to land on the moon. They built all the rockets. They had all the technology fully funded, and then they scrapped it for the Skylab program,
Yeah.
which was also fully funded. And this is in the height of the Cold War, and we're told that, we initially wanted to go to the moon with the Russians. That was kind of the plan.
Yeah.
There's a possibility behind why they took out Kennedy
Yeah.
in that element because nobody wanted that. We're in the middle of this Cold War, and there's no way that we would ever do a joint space program with the Soviets. Well, what was Skylab 1, 2, and 3? It was a joint space mission
Well,
with the
and
Soviets.
we and Apollo Soyuz in what, 1974,
Yeah,
when we did the link up,
yeah, yeah.
I think there may be, again, there may be an answer in both the ancient writings and in current um, lunar mission conspiracy theory.
Sure.
And we've got 2 minutes, so I want to hold off on making that point until we start the second half. But I pulled this off my shelf. This is a wonderful model. I love
Malibu.
having this in my collection. I love building it. It's totally cool. But folks, it's bullshit. It never existed. It's based on the Adamski, UFO. And essentially, this was a Coleman lantern shroud.
Huh.
Okay.
Yep.
What you're looking at here is virtually identical. I think with the Hanabu, they just added these little round things instead of, but essentially, this was the shroud for a lantern, a camping lantern in the 1950s. And you can see, like catalog advertisements and descriptions of the very thing. And as cool as this is, no, the Nazis did not build any of the Hanabus. And anyone who does any honest research on that
We'll
uh, learns
stumble into
that.
that very quickly.
Yeah. Now, what I'm referring to when I say we're talking about the moon, and there's something in the ancient lore as well as in current modern Apollo moon landing conspiracy theory. And that is that there's somebody else on the moon and that we were told not to come back. Okay, that's a popular conspiracy theory, and
Right.
interesting that all sorts of people are going back now. Now, here's a
Well,
tidbit.
mostly is robotics, which I find interesting.
Right, we're the first. Well, I argue that we've been sending people up there on
Well, of
classified
course,
missions.
because we have a public facing space program, but the
Yeah,
military also has a space program.
sure. Now, here's an interesting thing. Um, the Rig Veda, and I'm
Okay.
quoting from this interesting R. Palati book again. The Rig Veda, and I'm going to look up which Rig Veda specifically that we're talking about, which entry in the Rig Veda. Uh, it speaks about people journeying out of this world and that they must first come to the moon to answer questions. And if they can answer them, they are allowed through and beyond.
Ah,
And he asked the question, through to what? Now, this makes me think of the Lokas,
I was just thinking
Lokas,
the exact same thing.
right?
Yes.
And it talks about how
The,
on
the moon is
the
like a way station or
yeah,
or a post, and in Moon Conspiracy, we are all quarantined. This is a prison planet. And so if we have reached the right initiation and atonement, maybe that's the questions being asked. It kind of even reminds me of going into the duat in ancient Commission or
yes,
Egyptian philosophy,
yes,
where you have to break down your body and your soul and your energy into seven souls.
Right.
The last one being Ib, which is your heart, which then is
Mhm.
weighed against a feather
Yes.
to see if you're pure enough to continue on to the final two of the nine souls. The
Yes.
last one is the energy body, and the last one is just pure energy, which is called Aken.
And when you talk about the purity, if you're
Right.
pure enough or clear enough, so to speak, this is what another Vedic scholar in some other sources that I've read talks about when, people say, wait a minute, what's all this stuff about the moon being a living place? It's just a dead zone with nothing but the gray soil, right? Desolate. Well, this scholar says, here's the thing. Remember, the astronauts came back and they were behaving really weird, and they were, if they tried to
It was
remember
like
specifics,
severe depression. I mean, beyond.
and nausea and violently ill, they, just this some type of control, right, over their memories and perception. Well, this particular scholar says that the way the Lokas work is if you're on that pure level, so to speak, properly prepared was the implication. If your body's properly prepared, okay, we watching at home saw the desolate place, but the astronauts who encountered what's really up there and who's really up there, they saw what was up there from the perspective of being tuned in to the full spectrum of what's up there.
Mhm.
And this scholar is saying there's flora up there, there's fauna, there's
Water.
water, and that's possibly what Armstrong and Aldrin saw while they were up there, and other astronauts. Because think about it, these astronauts, I think all of them had been or were military guys, right? And they were in
Right.
their youthful prime, and they were prepared and trained. And we don't know the actual dietary regimen they were on. They could have been cleansed, right? Properly prepared. And when they got up there, if they had truly properly prepared, they were attuned to see more than was apparent on the cameras, is the point, that this one
If
scholar was
if
making.
even the video footage is legit. So we might not have been seeing
What's up there?
what's up there at all.
Yeah. Hmm.
I'm
Because
I'm
of
I'm
what
in the
we
camp
can
that
see.
we
Mhm.
went, but what we were shown on TV possibly
Yes.
was staged
Yeah.
because if they had an accident up there, it would be on live TV.
Yeah. It would have. It would have. And that was a big, at least the first time, especially, was a dog and pony show. And you know what I think? I put it out there. My big thing is I do not think Apollo 11 was the first time we did it. I think, and they're heroic for not revealing themselves and following orders, but I think we put boots on the ground before Apollo 11 to make sure that we could do it
Right,
rather than testing that for the very first time with Apollo 11 in front of the whole world in the Cold War.
right.
I don't buy that. I think that we tested that to make sure. Now, don't get me wrong, it's still dangerous as hell, whether it was Apollo 11 or Apollo 37. It's going to be dangerous each time, but the knowing that it could work, um, I think brought the stress level down.
Sure. And we know they orbited Apollo 10 around the moon but never landed it. They had everything to land, so we're told. How many other Apollo missions, or side missions launched, ready to put boots on the ground, as you put it. Yep.
Well, and I want to bring up compartmentalization because the big rebuttal to what you just said is there's all sorts of civilians that are space program buffs, and they go, "Oh no, there's this, that, and the other. We would have known about it. The ham radio operators would have known." And I'm like, you know what? And they say there's Apollo employees by the thousands that would have known about it. Bullshit. There's thousands of people in the military, and not everybody is privy. I'll give you an example on a very simplistic, basic, knuckle dragging level. I'm deployed. Wow, it's 30 years ago this September. I'm deployed for the first time to Saudi Arabia, and in a detachment of 5 agents, maybe six. I'm the only one with the clearance level, on my level. And so I get the honor of, if something comes over a particular source, technological source, I'm the only one in my detachment who's allowed to go over there and look at it, not
Hmm.
even the detachment commander.
Hmm.
And then when I come back and tell the detachment commander, and I can only tell them up to a certain level in the basics that I'm allowed to tell. But that device, I'd have to go over in the middle of the night if it came through, and I would look at the screen on the device and see what was in there. There's just one simple-minded knuckle dragging example of, yeah, there were other agents deployed with me, but they were not privy to what I and other people on my level were privy to. And it works the same way with the space program,
Of course.
especially with the space program. So,
Well, look
there
look at
were
even the nuclear program. I mean, that was so compartmentalized that people had no idea what they were working on, except only a few people at the top.
yeah,
And so the notion that, oh, there's, 10,000 people working at NASA on all the radio telemetry and this, that, and the other thing, somebody would have seen something. And I'm like, they didn't have to be read in.
exactly. Exactly. And, and when you have, going back to the Vedic thing, when you have a mind as brilliant as Oppenheimer's, and he, I mean, he let the cat out of the bag. He was well versed enough in what was going on in the Vedic literature, right? That he quotes it.
Become death, destroyer
Yeah.
of worlds. Yeah.
So, it's here's what's interesting. The reason I'm bringing it up is, yeah, we're sending people to the moon again overtly, you know, covertly is I think we sent people up there. Maybe, maybe it's possible that on one of these classified missions, the questions were answered properly. And
Hmm.
now we've been given the blessing to go back to the moon openly and beyond. Maybe we didn't, maybe I'm wrong about, I think I've suspected that we would have tried a secret mission to Mars, and maybe we did, but it failed, whatever. But maybe we didn't, and maybe the reason we didn't was that we couldn't.
I'm gonna grab something off my shelf real quick.
Sure, because while
Hold
you're doing
hold
that,
on.
yeah. Um, I'll extrapolate a little bit more on that. Maybe there's something, maybe these questions really have to do with gaining the knowledge necessary to travel through outer space. Maybe there's something about outer space. Think about what Joseph Farrell's been writing about recently with the plasma physics in his Demon in the Acre book. In particular, I direct you to that. Maybe there is something out there that we must have to be able to cross outer space beyond the moon to the other planets. And whoever's on the moon are the ones with that answer. Or maybe these people on the moon who are the gatekeepers, maybe that's symbolic for something is on the moon that when we understand it, that reveals what we need to know to get interplanetary or interstellar travel. So, it behooves people to pay more attention to this Vedic lore, where these things are concerned. So what'd you get?
So this is National Geographic from
Uh-huh.
1988.
Okay.
It's mostly on Mount Everest, the honey hunters of Nepal, but probably four-fifths of the way through it is
Mm-hmm.
this.
Oh.
And this mission to Mars is fully planned out in this 1988 National Geographic.
Sure.
to the point where they have all the technology and all the
Imagine that.
people that they wanted to have involved. So they even have how we're going to get there. We're going to
Hmm.
slingshot, or I mean, they're doing wind tunnel and isolation testing of possible craft. They have the orbital arrangement and how two craft would meet up in orbit and become the satellite that then detaches and lands on Mars.
Hmm.
Designs of exactly what it is and how they're going to get there.
Yeah.
Prepping the crew, what the inside of the ship possibly looks like, all that jazz. They even built it's basically the rooms. They built all
Oh,
this stuff. This is
yeah.
1988.
Yeah, it's ready, you know?
Hydroponics, how they're going to grow food, underwater testing of equipment like they do.
Hmm.
A lot of this is recycled from the space program, but having a shower in space or in zero gravity.
And it was it was even part of the original intention to get to the other planets.
Interesting concept art.
Yeah.
The dune buggies that we wanted to send, where we're going to land, landing sites that they've chosen.
Yeah.
I mean, it's this is one of the most fascinating articles, and I remember this when I was younger. And here's ground station one. And so if they have planned all this out already, who's to say that we didn't attempt it?
Oh, and I think we at least attempted it. I would not be surprised if we were to find out that um, at least one attempt was successful, that we
Who
put
who
boots on the
cleaned the
ground.
solar panels off of the Pioneer or the what was it? One of the rovers.
Yeah. And we can't be sure that there wasn't some type of breakthrough in some type of teleportation or some type of special wormhole type of thing.
That's
Maybe,
interesting you say that because when I was in LA, I drove by the building that supposedly has the jump room in it.
and
It's
where's
near
that?
it's near the Northrop Grumman headquarters, on the way to Redondo Beach or Hermosa from
El
LAX.
Segundo?
Yeah, somewhere in there.
Yeah, LA Air Force Base, my first station is right there in El Segundo. And all the aerospace was um, as a counterintelligence agent for OSI, we would we would brief them on counterespionage, counterintelligence issues. And
Hmm.
when I got briefed, because remember, I went into the Air Force with above top secret to begin with because of the FBI, and kind of a amusing little story when I and another new agent went over to get briefed to our security levels, right? Um, we go over there and there's a room full of like officers, military and enlisted military personnel at different levels, and us two OSI agents.
And the cigar smoke is thick.
And it's a theater. You're sitting in a theater type setup and there's stuff on the screen. Well, they brief up to a certain level and then they say, okay, except for Special Agent so and so and Colonel so and Senior Master, blah, 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 the rest of you are dismissed, right? Well, I'm over there with another new agent, and they brief the first level, which is I think it was the TS level or whatever. And they said, okay, except for Colonel so and so, Colonel so and so, Major so and so, and yada yada, and Special Agent Bosley, the rest of you are dismissed. And the agent I was with, he was like, "You get to stay." I'm like,
I guess
and
so.
I kid you not, um, they would do the next level and they dismissed everyone but me and one other guy. And then they did the next level and they dismissed. I was there by myself getting the remaining level that I was cleared. And I really can't say. We refer to it as tickets
Hmm.
beyond. top secret. Okay. And yeah, now I can say when I was in Ohio, I was in a SAP, an SAP, Special Access Program, what I did. But we used to never say that. And then Hillary Clinton said SAP, in front of the whole country. So, there goes that
Oh,
acronym.
kind of like Ollie North
Yeah.
disclosed that we have a continuity of government.
Yeah, exactly
Oh,
right.
whoops, we need to talk about that in a skiff.
Yeah. So, anyway, the way they brief you, I will say this, I've said this before. It's kind of like when you test for a foreign language in the government, either federal agencies or the military. That test is a fake language that's only engineered to determine your aptitude for studying and learning languages. It's a fake language on that test. I
Hmm.
I I was they wanted to send someone to Russian training, but the test was not in Russian. It was this fake language. And I qualified. Actually, I wasn't sure what language, and they said, "Oh, you qualified. You got the highest score in your division, San Francisco, at that time. So we're going to send you to Russian training." This technology briefing stuff, it's weirdly vague. There's it's and literally it had to do with stuff that was in space. I
Hmm.
mean, that's all I can say. But what they do is it's like a category, right? Because they know that in your job, that's when you're going to get exposed to the specifics. So I'm briefed in to this cosmic level, and I'm working with the aerospace engineering firms that are doing sneaky deaky stuff for the Air Force. And that's where and when I learned specifics about technologies. But it's interesting how I've always found it really
Well,
interesting.
I think I brought this up with you before. What was it, 1955 or 52? We had the first prototypes of what would then become the Lockheed Blackbird SR-71. So it was
Hmm.
not the A-10 Warthog, obviously. That's a different. It was the
Yeah.
A-110 or something like this.
Hmm.
But this aircraft that looks just like the SR-71
Hmm.
had a parasitic drone that would sit
Yes.
on top of it.
Uh-huh.
And that drone could house equipment. It could hold up to 2 or 3 astronauts.
Hmm.
And so here we have a plane that can go into the upper atmospheres and launch into space
Yeah.
in the 1950s. So why do we need massive rockets if we have a plane that can do this? And I was on a different podcast talking about this a couple of years ago, and man, people just went off on me in the comments. They're like, "Oh, that's not true." I'm like, "Look it up. It is." I'm
Oh,
sorry.
I got to tell you,
I'm sorry, it is.
one of my peeves in this frigging, and I'll say that in community, are all these goddamn know-it-alls,
Yes.
armchair know-it-alls. I was on somebody else's show, and one of their regulars, um, she was giving me, I mean, me with my background and her with zero background in this, and she's just being cocky and telling me I don't know what I'm talking about regarding it was during the Tic Tac era issue, and them testing technology in a way where civilians might see it. That never, blah blah blah. Somebody sent me a paperback copy of a particular book that had been written, a book called Dark Eagles, and said, you might find chapter whatever interesting. And so I went there, and sure enough, it talks about how this happens all the time, where when they're testing stuff, they can't 100% keep, there's gonna be people seeing stuff. And then you combine that with the extent that I already knew that from my job, but this community has people that just, and what it is it's a human reaction. People use cocksurety because they're just scared to death to look like they don't know something, and they're scared to death to admit they don't know something. So they got to be all cocksure. And it's kind of a what's that principle called? The Dunning-Kruger thing.
Right.
It's the people that the less they know and the more ignorant they are, are prone to exaggerate the cocksurety even more
Sure.
so. Because people, you know this, people that are legitimately in any particular field or world, and they're legitimately there and they're a serious professional, they'll readily admit what they don't know. You know, they'll readily say, like with my
This is
profession,
my
people
opinion.
say,
Yeah.
you were this, you were that. And I say, I was never a commando. I was never, no, no, no. I was a this and a this. Because when you're a professional, you're honest, you know. And anyway, that's my rant.
Interesting.
So,
So,
what are your thoughts on this idea of this gatekeeping to the rest of space, or, you know, going farther out, that something or someone. Now, what I said while you were going to the shelf was that if it's not the presence of an intelligence that serves as the gatekeeper, could it be the relics or the remnants or something that's there that once we figure out what it is and how it got there and who this, that, and the other, that maybe the answer is inherent within that. And I referred to Joseph Farrell's discussion and work, particularly he discusses this in his book Demon of the Ecker, where he talks about plasma physics plays a much more present, greater role in what we call outer space. And maybe we need to understand plasma physics a lot more clearly
this
before we can
gets into
even
the
attempt.
electric universe, right? And
Ah,
so if our sun is not a giant nuclear reactor, well, what is it? It's electromagnetic and
mhm.
it's plasma.
Okay.
And so
Yes.
all of this, we're realizing all of the suns or all of the star um, systems basically
Mhm.
are connected by a dark matter, which could be a plasma.
Mhm.
I have a weird feeling that space is fluidic. We just don't recognize it as such because of our vantage point. But I do find it interesting talking about gatekeeping on the moon, getting into, a little bit of a scientific idea behind it.
Yeah.
Earth and the moon are in the same electromagnetic sphere.
Right.
To our knowledge, we have never sent a human being beyond that
Right.
because we don't know technically if they would be able to survive. Because if we don't have the Schumann resonance of this planet, which keeps us alive,
Mm-hmm.
keeps the heart ticking, that's the Schumann resonance. We can't quite take that with us. So this comes back to that quarantine zone and having that right level of attunement to be able to go beyond the electromagnetic sphere and the Schumann resonance.
Could the Schumann resonance be artificially maintained, created and maintained?
I'm not sure.
Because we have Oliver Heaviside,
Right.
who with GEM, gravito-electromagnetics, hypothesized in the 1890s that with GEM, you could create an energy shell around an object, in this instance, a spacecraft, so
This
that
is
if you
Merkaba
had
technology.
the what?
This is the Merkaba technology.
Yeah. And you could have your Schumann resonator technology aboard the ship, and the GEM energy shell protects it from whatever the hazards of plasma
Deep
or
space.
etheric space are.
Sure. Huh.
So this is, you know, and
I'd
and
forgotten that Oliver Heaviside was working with GEM technology. I totally forgot about that.
yeah,
But
I
yeah,
it blew my mind when I was working on my book Origin. I was like, what the, what, wait, in the 1890s? I got excited because I'm like, again, it was, I was digging into the Tesla airship to Mars legend. And when I learned that this guy Heaviside had theorized this in the 1890s, and the Tesla airship to Mars story allegedly takes place in 1903, that's where I came up with the tentative 1903 group as the breakaway opposite of the Nimza breakaway and all that. Um, I mean, think about that. You have thinkers, you have Heaviside coming up with this in the 1890s. You have John W. Keeley
Yep.
messing with resonance and anti-gravity as
And
controversial,
Tesla.
and Nikola Tesla and the Sonora Aero Club, according to Del Show. So, folks, we do we didn't need some ET craft to crash to reverse engineer in the 1920s or 30s. We've
Right.
had human beings working on this. And where did they get a lot of their ideas from? Studying the old Vedic sources and lore. And where
Yep.
did the Ananurba go to? They went to India, they went to Tibet, they went to Nepal, they went, to these places looking for these sources. And I just say that we can't, you know, we can't ignore it forever.
Sure.
Now, on another thing that has come up particularly in the last week, talking about who may be encountered out there, and this could be one of the reasons why there's gatekeepers on the moon. I said before that just because the military industrial complex uses a threat narrative
Right.
um, to scare us into giving them more money and this, that, and the other, doesn't mean there's not a threat. And, it, it- you know,
Well, look at when Lou Elizondo and Grush came out. I mean, how
yeah.
much of a frenzy both of them stirred up. All of a
Mhm.
sudden, you have massive government funding for the Space Force and other technologies just from these two counterintelligent disinformation agents who really had nothing to say. Oh, I knew somebody that saw something,
Yeah.
but I can't talk about
Yeah.
it. You know?
Yeah, yeah. And then you have, it doesn't help, we're trying to figure out who and what, and then you have the vice president of the United States, saying, "Oh, I think they're all demons." Oh, for crying out loud. I mean, come on, you guys. Now look, don't get me wrong. I think whatever these beings are that we call demons exist because they're in all traditions.
Yep.
Um, but I wonder what the Judeo-Christian world in the West, what
Well,
these people
you
are.
had oh God, what was his name? Boot he was he worked for the Vatican
Yeah,
and he was a like demon exorcist kind of character.
Malachi Martin.
No, it starts with an F. I can't think of his name.
Hmm.
Fukuchina or something like this.
Okay.
And he came out and publicly stated, even though extraterrestrials are not burdened to the original sin, they're still God's creation and therefore can be blessed. And so having the vice president come out and say, "Oh, these are all demons," this is ramping up the religious side of the narrative to get them on board because
Yeah,
what did the think tanks, for
everyone's
Apollo
gonna
say?
panic. Yeah.
Yeah, the world would panic, religions would collapse, society would collapse, financial institutions would collapse. This is what the
Well,
Brookings report put out.
yeah.
And
And what I was gonna say
the
is,
way they discussed it was we need to have a mechanism where we start out with a slow drip and eventually it becomes
yes,
more of a waterfall or a cascade. And we're at that cascade point. Aliens are in almost every sector of media at this point.
yeah,
And
yeah,
so that drip is no longer just a movie here or a TV show there or this
right.
there and that there. Now it's everywhere. It's all around us. It's the most fascinating subject that people want to talk about.
Well, I wonder what the Judeo-Christian world's going to do if they find out when they find out that the Vedic stuff is way more true than they've dismissively been told. We're told to disregard all that. The very childish notion that,
Gee, I wonder who
there's
did that. Was it the Greeks?
yeah, hundreds, there have been hundreds, some people say thousands of gods, but oh yeah, yours is the real one. Your story is the true one. All the other ones are fake. And that just on the face of it is ignorant. And the only reason we have to discuss this is going to happen. I think it's happened in the past. We are again going to encounter the beings from out there. And, you know,
Well,
people got to let go of the childish
this comes
stuff.
back around to a very interesting conversation that I've had before.
Yeah.
Um, what if we are the extraterrestrials?
I think, I think we are, and it could be a thing where every single one of us, to some degree, has the DNA of off-world beings, or human
Well,
beings in general are
look
just
at the
from somewhere.
races that we have on this planet. Yes, we're all the human race, but we have races on this planet.
Yes,
I'm not trying to, have a racial conversation here,
right.
but one group, one race of humanity cannot produce another race of humanity. We can all interbreed and
Yeah, because we're all
hybrids,
humans.
create hybrids, which makes us all genetic cousins.
Yes.
And Farrell often talks about
Yes,
genetic
he did.
cousins being
Yep.
out in the cosmos.
Hmm.
So this kind of gets into my studies into the Dropa and Dropa stones, because here
Hmm.
you have a group supposedly from Sirius who end up crashing here on Earth and have to blend with the local population to survive. And the
And how
only
were they
way they can,
described?
what's that?
How were they described
About
by
4 foot tall, golden brown skin, and bluer within blue eyes.
isn't that
And
interesting?
you find this connection to Sirius continuously in these scripts.
Yeah.
And I've found that fascinating, because here's this tribe of people that come out of far eastern Kham Tibet. Here, going back to the Kham story,
Yep.
they come out of a very remote region, and in 1950 they were basically forced into becoming nomads. They're called the Dropa, but that name transliterates across the region. So in far eastern Kham Tibet, they're the Dropa. In central Tibet, High Tibet Plateau, they're the Zopa, Dzopa. In Nepal, Bhutan, northern India, they're the Drokpa, which literally translates to people of the cloud dragons. And then the further west you go, they become the Brokba. And it's all the same group of people. They're nomadic. There's probably 3,000, if not a few more, but not many. And they speak a dialect called Shinna, Shinna Brokskat, Brokat, and Minoriscat,
Hmm.
which predates Sanskrit by over 2,000 years.
That's
They
interesting.
brought Nyingma Buddhism out of far eastern Kham Tibet into Bhutan,
Hmm.
and it's a very small, rare sect of Buddhism that talks about levitation, astral projection, ascended Tulku masters, dimensional portals of Mount Meru, and how they
Yep.
connect to Sirius through a rainbow bridge, the Sintamani stone. All these come out of this very small sect of Buddhism that this Drokpa people brought with them. And so this is where my studies for my thesis were going, and why I started realizing that there is descriptions in Buddhist poetry talking about extraterrestrial visitation
Hmm.
from Sirius of all places, coming in flying palaces, towers of 7 layers, accompanied by hundreds of thousands of musical instruments being played without players, and having the ability to traverse across time and space in the blink of an eye.
Yeah. Look, interdimensionality is the key to this mystery as far
Sure.
as traveling these distances, where these people, these beings are coming from. And, I think for the longest time, in modern times, you'd have these interdimensional humans come here and say, yeah, we're from this planet or that star, because they didn't want to, and they might well have been, but they realized these people are in a context of rocketry, Buck Rogers crossing the stars. They're not ready for interdimensionality. So,
No.
um,
Interesting.
and some of us might have been brought here by these beings who this was their world before it was ours.
Hmm.
I think too that there's something to be said about the destruction of the civilization on Mars, a la John Brandenburg's theory, that I think Joseph Farrell has mentioned this, that the destruction came from here, that we were the foe in that war. The war was between Earth and Mars, and we're the ones who destroyed
Hmm.
Mars. But anyway, we're down to just a couple of minutes, believe it or
Yeah,
not. And as usual, we're just getting into it.
of
But
course.
I got to have you back again soon. I think you're not traveling for a while, right?
I'm not. I know this is a pre-recorded show, but I'm gonna be. What is it? April 6th. So tomorrow night I'll be on Coast to Coast AM from 10 to midnight
Oh, I'll make sure to put that in the
with
description. And
George
I
Noory, and
might just load
I'll
this
be talking
tonight.
about the subjects in my books
Okay.
for the audience there. It's gonna be huge. Possibly gonna be doing Sedona in July.
Okay.
I think it's the 18th and 19th, and then again at the end of September or October in Las Vegas at the Alien event there.
And remind everybody where they can get your books and where your website is.
Through megalithic.mysteries.com or through lulu.com. Just look up Dropa Legends and Lore, The Magic of Symbols, and Kemet, The Land Before the Greeks.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, Hans, it's great talking to you about this stuff and all whatever we talk about. It's always awesome. So I want to have you back on
Agreed,
sooner this time, and
for sure.
we'll continue this conversation because I think
This is
we're
fascinating, and I'm sure it can go a lot deeper.
yeah, and
How
it'll
deep
be
does the river
interesting.
go? We don't know until we reach the bottom.
Yeah, exactly. And it'll be interesting to see what happens on this current moon mission, the
Agreed.
the first public manned mission in 53 years. So maybe they'll couple disclosure.
Grab your popcorn and sit down and watch.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, folks, thanks again for watching, and we're gonna have Hans Dietrich on again soon.